Working Cows Podcast, episode 134.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast, here with another episode for you guys, powered by the Global Ag Network. And I am here today. We're going to talk with Ben Gotschall, and we're going to talk to him about kind of the ins and outs of managing complexity within our businesses and some of those different things that go along with trying to get all of the potential value out of the business that is there. And so I'm really excited to talk to Ben today. He is a dairy producer from eastern Nebraska and has a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience, and a lot of good things to share. So really excited to have Ben on the show today. Ben, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast.
Thank you, Clay. I'm glad to be here.
So I guess where I'd like to start is, could you talk a little bit about the recent struggles in the dairy industry as you see them? How are they similar to the beef industry, and how are they different?
Sure. As I see it, I think that the beef industry and the dairy industry are similar. I think we've seen a lot of consolidation in both industries. We have a lot fewer dairy producers now than we did 30, 40 years ago. The farms have gotten bigger. The production per cow has increased. So consolidation is one thing. Fewer farmers, fewer farms, more volume, and the impacts that has on the market, and likewise the impacts that the market has on producers. Cost of production has increased, even though prices may not have increased over recent years. Depending on where you live and where you're producing beef or dairy, access to land, the cost of land, access to capital, the cost of capital, feed, all the different inputs that go into a dairy operation can really add up. And so cost of production is something that if the milk price that a farmer is getting for their product is not enough to cover that cost of production, then there's just really nowhere to go. So we've seen a lot of those costs go up. I have seen that in my lifetime anyway. And so it doesn't seem to me like the increased production of the cows has kept up with that cost of production. And then just the value of milk. What is the value of milk? What should be a delicious, nutritious, nutrient-dense product that people crave, in some cases has become a kind of a watered-down version of itself that people just don't really prefer anymore. Some of that is due to marketing. Some of that is due to, I'll call them alternative products, but a lot of it is due to, in my opinion, processing. Milk is a highly processed food, and when you process a product, you alter its integrity, you alter its flavor, and so the high fat, high nutrient, food, high quality food that you get from the cow isn't what the consumer is buying at the store. So there's a disconnect there, and that disconnect has grown. So I think there's a variety of things that have caused the problems that we're seeing in the industries, but I do think there are bright spots.
Right. Yeah, and I think so far, those concerns, those challenges are all related to the challenges that we are experiencing in the beef industry. Consolidation, increased production per cow, the value of the commodity not matching the increase in the input that it took to get the increased production. I think those are all very similar challenges that we're seeing. One thing that strikes me as maybe a difference between dairy and beef, cow-calf production specifically is in your mind, would you say there's less of a lag in the dairy industry as far as you're producing a commodity that's very perishable, that is, from the cow to the truck in less than 24 hours, I would say. Do you think that plays any part, or is a major difference?
Absolutely. There's kind of that daily routine for one thing. You're milking the cows once or twice or three times or more a day if you're doing it, if you're milking it with a human being and not a robot. And so you have that constant milk flow, which is great because milk flow is cash flow. You're always selling. The milk truck may come, depending on your situation, they might come a couple times a week, every other day. It just kind of depends. And you're getting that milk check, hopefully getting that milk check, every other week or maybe more often. But back when we sold to a truck, it was every other week. So you're getting that, you have that cash flow. But on the flip side of that, you have a perishable product, like you mentioned. And so you have to maintain the quality and integrity of that perishable product. And it's because it's a fluid product, it's a fluid marketplace also. The price can go up or down hourly. And so the pay point, the price point that you get for your milk as a producer, as a conventional producer, I'll say, is, I would say, almost 100% out of your control. And you have to sell it because you can't store it. If I'm selling beef, which I do, direct to consumer, I can control the price that I get for my beef. I can somewhat control my cost of production, so I can price my beef that's commensurate to that. And if a particular customer says, well, I don't know that I want to pay that much, I just say, okay, well, the beef will stay in the freezer and the next customer will want it. Right. So with milk, you have the challenge of, how do we, if you're not going to sell the fluid product, for example, how do you maintain the nutritional quality of that product? And again, that's where I see a lot of opportunity for dairy, for milk. There's many, many, many things that you can do with milk to produce other foods.
Right.
And I've tried almost all of them. I think, we've made cheese, we've made butter, we've made yogurt, we make our own kefir for our household. We never did that commercially. So, if you get into the value added aspect of it, which I think is one of the bright spots of dairy, is the direct to consumer value added type of a business. Your options are pretty much unlimited as far as the products that you want to make. In fact, and that might be a bad thing. In fact, in my experience, you can get that new productitis type mentality where just because someone wants it means you have to make it. And pretty soon you're making 10 different kinds of cheese and you're separating cream and making butter and you don't have time to do anything else. So, but that lends itself to diversification. It lends itself to specialization. People can learn these skills and be valuable, business people or laborers. And it makes it interesting too.
So in your mind, is the increased production in the dairy industry, has that been without consequence?
No, I don't think it's been without consequence. We mentioned consolidation. If a fewer number of larger producers can produce the same amount or more milk, that doesn't leave room for more farmers. And my personal opinion is that we need more farmers in more places. We need more of a decentralized food supply. as current events maybe can attest to that. I don't know when this episode will air, but we're smack in the middle of the COVID-19 lockdown.
Yep.
And grocery store shelves are empty. You can't get, if you can get a gallon of milk at my local grocery store, you can't choose which brand. You get the one that's left.
Right.
Or
which fat content.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I think the number of herds and the amount of production is both a consequence and has consequences. I mean, it is a consequence of, for lack of a better term, I'll say market and policy trends of the last 30 years. Because I think market is, especially in milk, is driven by policy. And not to get too far in the weeds on policy, but I think you have to be a realistic business person in today's climate. You have to realize that public policy, federal policy, including enforcement, plays a significant role in the way the marketplace behaves. Yeah,
absolutely. So in your opinion, are many of the issues market driven, in that the consumer has demanded a cheaper product, kind of irrespective of the consequences of that cheaper product, or are they policy driven, or is it a combination of the two, or has the consumer just gotten used to a cheaper product and it wasn't necessarily that they were demanding it?
Well, I think you mentioned things that are all a factor. Education, I would add, is a big one. When we pass federal mandates that we're not going to allow whole milk in schools, you don't have to teach a lesson in the classroom to send a message to the kids that whole milk is bad, or that, or they never even get to taste it. And you could get me started on the word whole with milk, because, even the quote unquote whole milk on the shelf is a reconstituted product that is similar in idea only to what actually comes out of the cow. So there's that, but yes. And I think over time, consumers, for example, a lot of I sell milk directly on the farm direct to consumers. People come to my farm and buy raw milk right out of the bulk tank from me. A significant portion of those folks are people in their 60s and 70s. And they're just like, they say, almost to a one of them say, I come out here and buy your milk because this is what milk is. This is what milk should taste like. And the stuff that you get at the store is not milk. It is a dairy product, but it's not whole milk. And so that's what I hear from the consumer, and I talk to, at least my small section of consumers all the time. And that's what they tell me, is that it's the flavor, that when the flavors in the fat, even grass-fed beef guys know that. The flavors in the fat. And so when you take half the fat out of the milk, you've taken half the flavor away. And when you homogenize it and break it up into smaller particles and pasteurize it and cook the living heck out of it, it changes the way it tastes. And there's lots of people out there that love milk, and milk is a great food. I love it myself. But to say that there's no difference between raw, full fat, cream line, unpasteurized, homogenized milk that comes directly from a cow, grass-fed or not, I happen to prefer grass-fed, and compare that to a 1% or 2% or even a whole milk from the store, there just is no comparison. And I think once people learn and once people taste and know, how their food is produced, that's a big part of it too. The disconnect between the consumer and the producer. I think that great things could happen in this industry But it's not going to happen with fewer farmers to tell the story. And that's just the simple truth of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to hear a little bit more about the whole milk and the whole on-farm milk as opposed to the whole milk in the store distinction in your mind. But first, I want to just share a little anecdote with you. When my wife and I it was early in my ministry career, and we were living right down the street from the high school in this house. And so we had opened our house up to the high school students to come and bring friends, and we'd cook you lunch over your lunch hour. You can come. And one time we just happened to put out 2% milk for their meal, and one of the kids poured it and took a drink, like, oh, gross, is this whole milk? And it's like they'd been drinking skim milk for so long that 2% even tasted different to them. And so it was just kind of one of those, kind of a picture of where we are in the world, that milk that you can almost see through is preferable to even store-bought whole milk, without regard to the differences between that and what you are producing. So I'd like to hear a little bit about kind of the whole food, as in actually whole foods from the farm, and your perspective on those things and the value of them in the marketplace.
Sure. My view is that milk is a perfect food. There's that concept of what is a perfect food. Honey is another one. The land of milk and honey probably wasn't a coincidence. But so milk in its whole form, I'll just use my experience because that's what I know. So we milk Jersey cows. They give probably between, mine are averaging, between the upper 5% to some of them up to 8%, but as a general rule, about 6%, 6.5% butter fat in their milk. So whole milk at the store is standardized at 3.5%. So whole milk is 3.5% butter fat. Well, even some of the lower butter fat Holstein herds now are averaging higher than 3.5%. And so what's happening is the processors are taking this raw product from these dairy producers, and they're removing the fat from it, and they're using part of that to make other products like butter, for example, and then they're reconstituting it back to a 3.5% level that is defined as whole milk. What happens when you separate the milk? That's a processing event. That affects the integrity of the fat. It does affect the flavor. I don't care what anyone says. It does affect the flavor. Reconstituted milk tastes different than the whole milk. When you pasteurize milk, you're heating it to at least 145 degrees, but some of the ultra high temperature pasteurization methods are even hotter than that. When you do that, you kill everything that's living in the milk. Because milk is a probiotic living food. It has lots of bacteria and enzymes in it that are in it to help digest the food, to help digest the components of the milk. And so probably the biggest thing that's killed in pasteurization is the lactase enzyme, which helps digest lactose. So in a lot of cases, and again, I'm speaking about customers that come to my farm on a weekly basis. I have a lot of customers that come to my farm that are lactose intolerant. Their body cannot digest the lactose sugar. They do not produce. Their body doesn't have the lactase enzyme present. Well, our milk that's not pasteurized does contain that lactase enzyme. It hasn't been killed through heat treatment. So the digestibility is there, and the flavor is there. And so those two things alone, I'd say, are the two biggest things that distinguish milk as a whole food from milk as a processed dairy product. there's a lot of other things that I could go into that would maybe take a whole episode, like the secondary proteins, like the A2 milk and the A2 beta casein protein, and some of the other proteins that are actually determined by the genetics of the animal, right, which is another, subject that I find fascinating, and another side of my business, which is the cattle and the genetics. All these things are in my mind interconnected, and that's what makes it a whole food. That's what makes it a holistic business, a holistic enterprise, is that even down to single a single gene governing a single protein in the cow can have an effect on the health or digestibility or desirability of the milk to a human. So it's just fascinating to me how all these different things that we have the benefit of knowledge. I mean, we have so much more knowledge now about the food that we eat in terms of its, chemical components, its nutritional qualities, the effects of processing and things. We have so much more knowledge now than we ever have in the past. The question is, are we going to use that to make progress and make better food that's better for people, and not just more of it at a lower price so that we can sell more of it to more people? So that I think is the struggle we have as a society, so to speak, is how do we truly feed and nourish people with whole foods, given all the knowledge and technology and economic factors that drive us.
Right. Yeah. And you mentioned the COVID-19 kind of lockdown that we're in. I anticipate this episode coming out early in April, and so it'll definitely still be relevant or fresh in people's minds. And, I think that kind of what you're talking about is local control. I think local control is always better than centralized control. And I would make an argument that local control in almost every way is better than a centralized control. But specific to what you're talking about, the food supply has proven itself to be in need of more local connection and control to people's ability to access food that doesn't come to their grocery store on a truck.
Absolutely. And I agree with you. I think local control is important, but I think, I don't think that centralized control on its face in itself is bad, but it has to recognize, those two things, those two elements have to have a relationship, and they have to recognize the validity of each other, and there has to be a balance. And I'm not an opponent of federal enforcement of laws. I think actually they ought to go back to the basics and go back to the beginning, and not to get too far down another trail here. But some of the oldest laws governing food marketing and availability in our country are not being enforced, and so it almost doesn't matter what we do at the local level if, from the top down at the federal level, these laws aren't being enforced, or they're not being enforced fairly across the sector.
Sure.
And that, I think, also plays a role in some of the imbalance of power in industries like beef and dairy. And I think that is a factor in some of the consolidation we've seen. It's just easier for larger conglomerated corporations to function as food businesses in this economy. But as we've seen, as you mentioned, the world has a funny way of leveling things out. And right now, if you're a farmer or rancher producing a food direct that you can sell direct to consumer, right now you are an important part of the economy, not just the food economy. So I think that should teach us something.
Yeah, absolutely. Could you talk a little bit more, or talk a little bit about the seasonality of production of grass-fed products, specifically in colder climates where that grass goes dormant, and how you are managing that in your context? Are you only offering products seasonally, or are you able to offer products year-round? How do you go about doing that in an area of the world where grass does go dormant, or we don't grow enough in the growing season to stockpile in
Sure.
most people's production cycles?
Sure. So I've done it both ways. I've done the year-round milking and providing products 12 months out of the year, and I've done it seasonally. Currently, we are doing it seasonally, um, uh, but up until a year ago, we were milking on through the winter, and so we were calving seasonally. We just had 2 calving seasons, so we had a tight calving window in the spring, so that our fresh spring cows were, on in their peak production during the peak growing season, and then we had another calving season in the fall, so that we had, so that those cows were giving their best and most milk through the winter months, so that we had that constant availability of product. So I won't go into the differences in summer grass milk versus winter milk. I think it's pretty obvious to most people who've had any experience with it. But the challenges, especially from a production and profitability standpoint, are those are those times when you have to purchase inputs, purchase feed, or produce it yourself. Because if you're going to milk through the winter, you're not just maintaining dry cow condition at that point. You have to provide a level of nutrition that's optimum enough to keep the cow producing, so that she can breed back, so that she doesn't lose body condition, so that she can produce a quality product. So what we did, obviously we really focused on our grazing methods. We focused on our rotations. We focused on on however you want to call it, whatever style of grazing you want to call it. I looked at all the, holistic management styles, the Jim Garish styles. Didn't do a lot of mob grazing with the milking herd, but we definitely did some of that with some of our other groups. But basically, the goal is extending the grazing season as far into the winter as possible, so that even though you're not getting fresh green growing grass, you're at least getting dry matter intake that you can then balance with maybe a small amount of protein supplement, which in our case was almost always purchased alfalfa. And then also storing our own feed. We have put up our own hay. My family on the beef ranch, we put up our own hay there, and baleage. So the baleage, most people know what baleage is by now.
Yep.
Baling the green hay, preserving it in a wrap, that makes fairly good milk. The integrity, the grass-fed integrity of the milk is closer to what it would be on grass through the winter on baleage. You run into some challenges with baleage sometimes. For example, if you're making cheese, you have to watch the amount of baleage that the cows are eating, relative to the amount of dry, fibrous type hay that they're getting. A lot of cheesemakers will tell you that you can't make good cheese from silage milk, and that's true. I find it to not be as true with baleage, as long as they're getting enough grass hay. But so, and then all the things that any grass-fed cattle, whether it's dairy or beef producers, have to focus on, like your recovery period, your rest period, the age density of the sward when you harvest it, plant diversity. So all the things that make good grass-fed beef, including the grazing methods for finishing, are what you focus on to make grass-fed milk. Alan Nation from the Stockman Grass Farmer, 20 years ago was saying this, that, if you know how to finish cattle on grass, then you know how to milk cow, you know how to feed dairy cattle. It's the same thing. And so that's kind of actually how I came to it, how, I learned a lot from my dad, who adopted kind of the grass-fed beef model shortly before we made a transition in our dairy business also to 100% grass-fed would have been about almost 21 years ago now. So all those things, and we've done the grazing charts. We've done the, I've kept records of every little thing, paddock by paddock, in a binder. I've done a lot of different management methods, but with the ultimate goal of the cows eating as high of a percentage of grass in their diet on a daily and annual basis as possible. And that's right. It's pretty simple, but there's a lot of complicated things that go into that. I've also tried to keep it simple. I mean, because you can start getting there's a million ways to manage things, and you can try to micromanage every little element of it. But overall, I think we've tried to keep it simple. Running a year-round grass-fed dairy operation is complicated enough, especially if you're processing your own products and doing all your own marketing. So the less, I don't want to say the less you can do, but the more simple you can keep it, so that there's a manageable way to do it from a human resources standpoint. That should be a goal, I think. Yeah. I think less complicated is better.
One of the challenges that comes to my mind in that business model is being able to have cows out grazing and close enough to get back for 1 or 2 milkings a day. So that just is an interesting thing to think about for me as somebody who's never been exposed to how that would even work.
Well, a laneway. We have a centralized laneway that you can get from any paddock on the farm to the parlor in a matter of minutes walking. The laneway, we don't always provide water in the laneway, because there's been some, I've seen some videos that some educators have put out about, why you do not want to have a laneway and why you do not want to water your cattle in a laneway. And I see the wisdom of that with the beef operation, but when you have to bring the cows back to the parlor twice a day, you definitely do need a laneway. And if you're walking them, half a mile, 3/4 of a mile or more on a day in July when it's 102 degrees, you might want to have some water in that laneway about halfway, for cow comfort and things like that. So that there are some differences, but the basic underlying principles of cattle nutrition and cow comfort are the same. But you also have to have the kind of cows that can do it. The cows are the catalyst that take that harvested sunlight or the stored sunlight in the forage, and they turn that into the food. So the cows definitely have to play their part. They're my most important business partner, and so they get a lot of consideration too. And not, when I say consideration, I don't necessarily mean special treatment or pampering. What they are, how they do their job is very important to me. And I could talk forever about cows, but so there's that.
Yep. Well, can you talk a little bit about that? Kind of what are some of the corporate, I guess, for lack of a better term, averages as far as production per animal in a Jersey herd like yours, and then what is your production per animal, and what is the relationship between a higher or lower production per animal ratio and profitability in your mind?
Again, I'll talk about Jersey cows because that's my experience. But the basic thing to know is that Holsteins are probably the more prevalent dairy breed nationwide and worldwide, and they give a lot more milk than Jerseys do from a volume perspective. So Jerseys give, kind of a more nutrient dense, higher solids, higher fat, higher protein milk at a lower volume. So that's basically, so when we made the transition from, we were never like a totally confinement, like high hot ration grain fed dairy. We always kept our cows on pasture, but we did feed a production pellet in the parlor, growing up on the dairy. We quit doing that, and like I said, about 20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago. At that time, the average Jersey herd gave had a yearly average of somewhere between 14,000 and 17,000 pounds of milk. And that's where I was at. I had one of the top herds nationally. We competed. I had individual cows that were doing Hall of Fame records at that time. So that since then that has gone up to, now the average herd can produce is capable of producing 20,000 pounds or more. So back when we were focusing on production, if you had a 20,000 pound Jersey, that was amazing. And now it's kind of like, well, you got to have at least that, or else you're not really doing anything.
Yeah.
So milk volume has increased, fat content has increased. There's been a lot of focus in recent years on solids, on butterfat percent in particular, and that's definitely something that we focus on too. So now, some of my best cows are probably only going to do 9 or 10,000 pounds in a 305 day lactation. Our herd average is half of what it used to be, a little better than half. It'll run between 6,000 and 7,000 pounds. But again, just like with beef production, you have to kind of change the way you think about things. And it's not, if I had continued in 1998, when I was a senior in high school, if I'd continued to focus on milk production per cow, I would have lasted maybe another 2 or 3 years, because at that time we were selling to DFA, who is still around. They're the biggest dairy co-op in the country.
Right.
And we had no control over our pay price, and it was below our cost of production because we couldn't control our cost of production because we were reliant on feed, purchased inputs. You can't just go and say to your feed dealer, my milk price went down a little bit. Can I pay you $40 a ton less for the feed this week? That doesn't work. So anyway, back kind of where we were going with this is, it's just like with beef. Again, I'll return to that. It's, you hear a lot of the beef experts and the beef guys saying, you've got to maximize or optimize profit per acre. And so that's very important on grass-fed dairy. How many pounds of product or dollars of product, which we sell all of our food by the pound mostly. So pounds is kind of just as good as dollars. So we were looking at, so we went from trying to produce 20,000 pounds per cow per year to, focusing on getting, kind of more like between, on a cow weight standpoint, we were usually running between 38,000 and 52,000 pounds per acre per day. We didn't start there after, years of management and the grazing rotation and the grazing ration. We improved our pastures to get to that point. And so, if you've got a cow that's only given 26 pounds a day, which is kind of the low average on a grass-fed cow that's a good Jersey cow that's your whole herd average. If you're having 26 pounds per day, at that rate, you're running, say, 25 cows on a little over half an acre a day. You're producing about 125 gallons of milk per acre per day. And so depending on what your price is on your milk, we sell our milk by the gallon. 125 gallons would be about 1,075 pounds. So about 10, almost 1,100 weight. Most of the conventional dairies on 100 weight. So, if you're selling direct, you just multiply that number in gallons by how much you sell your milk to your customers for per gallon. Or if you're selling to a truck, you multiply your 100 weight price by your 100 weight volume. So, that's kind of where we were at. That's kind of where we like to be on the low end of things. Obviously, we've had better years, better times of year. But what I'd like to stress here is that even the conventional grass-fed dairy industry isn't really paying a lot of attention to those types of things. It's still very much, even the grass-fed dairy industry is still much based. It's kind of like it's just like you just took the conventional model and plugged in a different feed input.
Right.
Obviously that's how you transition. You go from the known system into the unknown. Not that grass-fed is unknown, but it's maybe not quite as prevalent, and not as many people are doing it. So what I would love to see is a nationwide system and kind of a standardized way of measuring these things in grass-only systems, with grass-fed only cows, and a way for us, and I say us as seed stock producers of grass-fed dairy genetics, to establish baselines in the national herd and measure progress, not just in individual animals, but in herds. Because one thing about dairy is with the dairy herd improvement associations, you've got one in every state, the numbers are there. You can find production research and production numbers on dairy cattle, just name your variable, name your detail that you want to know, and you can find out by breed, by state, by year, by month. You can find all that information because there's this very elaborate and wonderful system of getting that information through on-farm testing and plugging it in through research laboratories that do the testing and all that. And I would love for there to be something like that in grass-fed dairy, because we're kind of just I don't want to say we're fumbling around in the dark, because we're very much paying attention to what we're doing. And I think a lot of the better producers are keeping accurate records, but there just isn't that system yet that's kind of geared toward what exactly it is that we're doing. Because when we participate in the conventional system, you would look at my rolling herd average compared to the rolling herd average of the top Jersey herd in the country, and you would say, well, obviously this guy's just struggling. I mean, he can't even get 10,000 pounds of milk out of a Jersey cow. How is he even making it work, And so there's just kind of not a lot of translation there. And so I would love to see us all working together to try to figure some of these things out and put I hate to say put a formula, but in some way figure out some of these profitability markers in grazing dairy. Because to me, grass-fed dairy is one of the bright spots in the dairy industry. The
Right.
things that Organic Valley and Maple Hill Creamery and some of the other, especially direct-to-consumer farm brands, you got Kelowna in Iowa doing the same, not the same thing, but this grass-fed milk, that is, to me, that's the part of the dairy industry that's growing, and showing the rest of the dairy industry that if you focus on connecting to the consumer, telling a positive story, producing a differentiated product that's value added, that tastes good, that looks different, then it can be successful. Not that the grass-fed industry, dairy industry doesn't have its challenges and its ups and downs, but to me, it's showing growth, and it's a bright spot. And so I look at that, and that's why I've been able to stay in business, and that's what gets me out of bed in the morning, to use that phrase.
So I want a short answer to this, because I don't want to lose this train of thought, because it segues well into where I want to head to wrap up. I want to be respectful of your time today. So when you said that it looks like the grass-fed model has just maintained the conventional infrastructure and changed the feed source, basically, are you saying that really the way to get the bang for your buck out of grass-fed dairy is by developing a direct-to-consumer market?
I'm not going to say it's the way, because I've done it both ways, and there is definitely a quality of life element of focusing on milking your cows and having that truck come and take your milk and getting that check every other week. That is definitely that there's a comfort in that should not be underestimated, and that, quality of life in that. And if the market, I say the capital M market, is there and healthy and functioning as it should, that can be a great way to make a living. But, sometimes due to economies of scale, location, like for me, for example, here in southeastern Nebraska, even if I wanted to sell organic grass-fed milk to a truck, I couldn't do it. There's no one that buys it here. And that's evidence of the capital M market, maybe not functioning to its fullest potential. That if I go 500 miles to the east, or even less than that to the east, I could probably sell grass-fed milk to a truck, but I can't do it here. So my option, if I want to do this and capture the value of what my product is, the option I have is to market it myself, whether it's raw on the farm, which we can do in Nebraska. It's legal in Nebraska and should be legal everywhere. but or whether I process it myself, which I have done in the past and made the difficult decision to stop doing. A year ago, I was pasteurizing, bottling milk, selling it to grocery stores and restaurants, making cheese 3 or 4 times a week, separating cream and making butter. And it was awesome. Our products were well received. We were receiving a premium price in the marketplace. Things were profitable on paper, but the quality of life started to suffer, because when you're doing all that stuff yourself, especially in our situation where it was kind of hard to figure out scalability for us. We were kind of too big to be small and too small to be big. There were times when we had too much help and times when we didn't have enough. And ultimately it came down to what we felt was very important, which was providing food to people directly. And we decided that we could do that without leasing several hundred acres and without leasing production space, and by just focusing on our small postage stamp of pasture and selling direct to our loyal tribe of customers that we consider to be, some of them are at that friend level, some of them are at that family level, but without them we wouldn't exist. And so if we're accountable to them, in a way, we're being accountable to ourselves too. And so Sure. that's kind of where we're at now. And so still doing it, just in a different way. And I know you asked for a short answer, and I don't think I delivered on that.
That's all right. I think you were an English major, right? So maybe it's a little bit of a ridiculous proposition.
I was, yes, but I'm not a lawyer, so.
Right. Well, I'm a pastor, so for me to ask for somebody to give a short answer is probably ridiculous as well. But in any case, I would like to close, and I know this is probably a whole episode in itself, but I would like to close just by hearing your perspective on the relationship between developing a direct-to-consumer market as production or as commodity prices, and I know that's maybe an offensive term, calling it a commodity, but as commodity prices have slipped below the cost of production in many different industries, not just beef, not just dairy. I'd like to hear your perspective on the work it takes to develop a direct-to-consumer market and the relationship between that and the fight for federal food or federal market regulations that can kind of stem the tide of vertical integration, if that makes sense.
Yes, I think I can try. Well, just to start with the last thing you mentioned, probably the single most important federal law is the Packers and Stockyard Act, which was passed almost 100 years ago. And the way it has been enforced in the last 30 years has played a significant role in how the market functions, in how the agriculture economy has functioned, and how many producers of ag commodities that we have now. So I'll just get that out of the way and say, if you want to know more about that, and I'll, a shameless plug, I also do work for, Organization for Competitive Markets as their policy and research director. And so it's my job to study these things. So I won't talk more about that just because that's, like you said, it's another whole thing. But that single piece of legislation, if it were to be enforced as it was intended, which is to protect producers and not foreign-owned corporations, if it was enforced in the way it was intended, we would have a different ag economy now, I think, and I believe that.
Yep.
But so no more on that. Boy, there's a lot of little kind of glib, I don't want to say glib, but like soundbite types of things, that I tell myself, that I tell people, about, the direct marketing thing. And, one of them is you can't get real nutrition from fake food is one of them. It's like, we've seen the results of overprocessed, fake foods, so to speak, on human health and on economic health, especially, as it pertains to agriculture. So just developing a new, better fake food is not going to solve anything. And so you can probably assume what my stance is on some of the alternative proteins, whether that's, milk or meat. So I won't go into that. I'll just say you can't get real nutrition from fake food. And so at some point, the buck stops and the BS stops, and people know that and realize that because it affects them in a very real way. Most of my customers that come direct to me to get food have a problem. Like they have a very real health problem that affects their life, and they need nutrient dense, raw, real food as close to the source as they can get it. And so what I tell those people is, you don't have to live on a farm to eat like you do. Not everybody has to be a farmer. But the consumer has a certain amount of responsibility to seek out the foods that are going to nourish their bodies in the way that they need. But we also have a responsibility, which I think was another part of your question, as farmers. So how do we do this? Well, you have to figure out something. You have to figure out what you're going to do. Whether it's beef or eggs or pork or lamb, figure out what you're going to do, figure out how to do it well, and focus on quality. I think the main thing that separates from what I've seen, and I've had to deal with this too. The thing that separates the successful direct to market food producer from the folks that do it for a couple of years and then quit is a focus on quality. And that means nutritional quality, taste, but also quality of experience for the consumer. We have to listen to the consumer. And I'm not saying we have to do every little thing that every person that walks on our farm wants us to do. In fact, I think we should not do that. But when I say listen to the consumer, what are they responding to? What is it that you do that resonates with them? What is it that you do that doesn't resonate with them? And so one of the things that I do, communication is important. Start an email list, whether you have 4 people on your email list or 4,000, start an email list, have a basic website. You can choose whether or not to have a social media presence, but it definitely helps connect those things together and get people looking at your website, joining your email list, learning more about you, seeing you, kind of in your everyday life. Those things are important, to consumers. Start establishing that communication, and don't be afraid to ask questions. One of my favorite things to do is send out surveys to my email list, to my customer email list, and just ask them about things that we do, things that we might do, and just kind of gauge their reaction on things, even with things like pricing. And I think the consumers crave this. I think that this is what we're talking about when we say knowing where your food comes from and connecting to your food, is they're having a conversation with the person who produces their food about what they think is a fair price for it. That they think, consumers love that. They don't get that at the grocery store. If the person who works at the grocery store even knows anything about the product that they're asking a question about, it's usually like, whether it's on sale that week and how much it costs. It's like, it has nothing to do with, where it was produced. And, except if you do go to buy grass-fed beef at the grocery store, they might know that it comes from Uruguay, and that it's labeled as a product to the USA, which I won't get into that either. But that communication and that connection is very important. And so, in my opinion, from what I've seen, the producers that are willing to, I hate to say this, but I got to knock that chip off their shoulder of being a farmer and not expect the consumer to thank them, and not expect the consumer to kind of bend and bow to us. Not that we're not deserving of respect, and not that we're not deserving of reward for our labor, but I think that humility and that genuine curiosity to know how you can better serve someone, that's something that you can't fake. And so the farmers that really do that are the ones that are really successful, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, that's good. And very similar to words recently spoken here on the Working Cows podcast. So really appreciate that. I got one just final wrap up question, and then I want you to share some of the places people can get a hold of you. If the Packers and Stockyards Act was enforced the way it was written, protecting producers, would you be direct marketing milk?
Probably yes and no. I'd probably be in my vision of how the market would work. I would be able to sell my raw commodity, so to speak, on a market, while at the same time being able to provide food for my community without those things being mutually exclusive, and without the laws governing those activities being written and enforced by people who do not have my best interests in mind, who are only looking to protect their interests. So I think both. I don't think that it would be, I think I would have the option to seamlessly go between one or the other, depending on what was best for my business and the situation of the time. And I think that's what ideally, if that were the enforcement, if that enforcement were to take place, ideally, in my opinion, that's what it would look like. It would look like more options for more farmers to make more money and contribute more to their communities, so that we have more value on the food that we produce and our way of life.
Ben, very good stuff. Really appreciate your time today. Appreciate your generosity with your time today. Would you please share whatever links you would like at the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/134. Workingcows.net/134 is the show notes page for today. So if you have some links you want to share, go ahead and share them now, and I'll put them in the show notes page.
Sure. Well, my cattle business is called Holt Creek Jerseys. It's at holtcreekjerseys.com. My local food business is called Davey Road Ranch. It's just the name Dave with a Y at the end. DaveyRoadRanch.com. Both of those businesses have Facebook and Instagram if you want to check out what's going on with that. And then if you're interested more in some of the market reform type things, like I mentioned with OCM, Organization for Competitive Markets, it's at competitivemarkets.com. So those are some places you can look for if you want to.
Yeah, we'll make sure they get there. Ben, thanks for your time today. Well, really appreciate Ben's work with Organization for Competitive Markets, and appreciate Ben and what he had to share there. Coming up next week on the show, really excited to have Ian Mitchell-Innes, and just to tap into the wealth of knowledge that he is, and really excited to share that interview with you, and really hope everything is going well with you and yours. Been getting a lot of feedback, and hope that you take the opportunity to share the show with some people who maybe find themselves with a little bit more time on their hands than they're used to, and time to dive in and dig into the back catalog at ranchingpodcast.com. Over 135 episodes up there now, with bonus episodes and different things that we've done over the years, and just been a good time to for some people maybe to get those horizons expanded a little bit with the free time. So we will be back next week with Ian Mitchell-Innes. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.
I think I might have somebody delivering a goat here for me.
Well, that's important. You better go make sure it gets in the right place.
Yeah, I was just trying to think of what that might be, but yeah. So I better go grab that. But yeah, we'll catch up later, and I'll let you know when this comes out.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good. Thanks, Clay.
Ben.
Have a good one.
Bye.
All right.